Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis, by J.D. Vance. Picture this, a 12-year-old girl standing on her porch in the Kentucky hills, watching two men trying to steal her family's only cow. In a world without running water, that cow isn't just livestock, it's survival itself. But here's the thing about this girl. She doesn't scream for help. She doesn't freeze in fear. She walks inside, grabs a rifle, and does what needs to be done. The crack of the gunshot echoes through the hollow. One man drops, clutching his bleeding leg. The other one? He's already halfway down the road, probably questioning every life choice that led him to this moment. But our girl isn't finished. She walks over to the thief writhing on the ground, raises that rifle barrel to his head, and prepares to end it. Fortunately for him, and let's be honest, probably for her too, her brother appears just in time to talk her down. That fierce little girl was Bonnie Blanton. Years later, she'd become a grandmother, known to her grandkids simply as Mamaw. And that same girl who was ready to kill, to protect what was hers, would eventually become the last line of defense between her grandson and a world that seemed determined to destroy him. This isn't some Hollywood screenplay, this actually happened. This is the real story of J.D. Vance, a kid who grew up in a corner of America that feels both completely foreign and strangely familiar to so many of us. His memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, exploded onto the scene not just as a bestseller, but as a cultural lightning rod, a raw, unflinching window into the struggles of the white working class in America's Rust Belt and Appalachian communities. Millions of readers connected with it because it reveals truths about family crisis, lost faith, and fractured identity that we don't often talk about. By the time we're done today, you'll understand the hidden forces shaping millions of American lives. You'll see how a kid who nearly flunked out of high school, a kid surrounded by chaos, addiction, and poverty, somehow found his way to Yale Law School. And most importantly, you'll discover what it actually takes to save someone when everything around them is falling apart. This is a story about running from your demons, yes, but it's also about the harder truth. Some demons never stop chasing you. Learning to face them? That's the real act of courage. To really get J.D. Vance, you need to understand he had two homes, and they were completely different worlds. One was where he physically lived. The other lived inside him, shaping everything he'd become. His actual address for most of his childhood was Middletown, Ohio, a struggling steel town in the Rust Belt that seemed to be perpetually losing jobs and bleeding hope. Factories were shutting down, and that quiet desperation that settles over a place when an entire way of life starts crumbling, that was everywhere. But his heart belonged to Jackson, Kentucky, a tiny town buried deep in Appalachian coal country. This was the land of his ancestors, a place of stunning mountain beauty and grinding poverty, where people got called hillbillies, rednecks, or white trash by outsiders. To J.D., though, these were neighbors, friends, family. Jackson was where his grandparents, Mamaw and Papa, were born. They came from a world that didn't really do big dreams. It offered coal mines, poverty, and not much else. They were part of this massive migration of people, flowing north on what everyone called the Hillbilly Highway. In the late 1940s, they left those Kentucky hills chasing something better in Ohio's booming steel mills. In some ways, they actually found it. Papa landed a solid job at Armco Steel, making wages that would have seemed like fantasy money back home. They bought a 2-story house with actual indoor plumbing, basically a mansion by Jackson standards. But here's the thing, they never really escaped. They packed up the mountain culture and brought it with them. Fierce loyalty, intense honor, and tempers that could flip like a light switch. This was Scots-Irish culture, and as J.D. describes it, these were people who didn't trust outsiders, and definitely didn't back down from fights. This was a world where you defend a sister's honor with your fists, and settle disputes without ever thinking about calling the police. Case in point, Mamaw's brothers, the Blanton men. There was Uncle Pet, this successful businessman with enough charm to light up a room, until he didn't. When a truck driver insulted his mother once, Uncle Pet yanked the guy out of his truck, beat him unconscious, and then, and I'm not making this up, ran an electric saw up and down the man's body, just to make his point. The guy lived, and never pressed charges. He understood. You don't insult a man's mother. Then, there was Uncle T-Berry, who once held a boy at knife point, and made him eat a pair of Mamaw's underwear after the kid made a crude comment about her. For young J.D., these weren't horror stories. They were tales of justice, his family as the good guys, standing up for what was right. These stories made him feel like hillbilly royalty. And sitting right at the center of this universe was Mamaw, his grandmother. This woman was so tough that years later, a Marine Corps recruiter would tell J.D. that boot camp would be easier than living with her. She was a pistol-packing, foul-mouthed, chain-smoking force of nature who loved her family with an intensity that could genuinely scare people. But the new life in Ohio turned out harder than expected. Mama and Papa were newlyweds and new parents, suddenly isolated. Back in Kentucky, they'd had extended family everywhere to show them the ropes. Here, they were on their own, trying to figure out marriage and parenting without a safety net. Their marriage spiraled into chaos. Papa became a violent drunk. Some days, he'd come home from work, park the car nice and straight, and they'd have a normal family dinner. Other days, he'd stumble home wasted, and J.D.'s young mother and aunt would scatter and hide, bracing for a long night of screaming and violence. One Christmas Eve, he literally threw their Christmas tree out the back door in a drunken rage. But Mama, she was a violent non-drunk. She fought back hard. When Papa passed out on the couch, she'd cut his pants so they'd split at the seams the next day. She'd hide his wallet in the oven. She waged a covert war, dedicated to making his drunken existence miserable. After one particularly brutal night, she looked him dead in the eye and said, if he ever came home drunk again, she'd kill him. A week later, he came home drunk and collapsed on the couch. Mama, true to her word, grabbed a can of gasoline, poured it all over her sleeping husband, struck a match, and dropped it on his chest. Their 11-year-old daughter had to jump in and save his life. This was the legacy J.D.'s mother, Bev, inherited: love and violence, loyalty and chaos, all mixed together into one explosive cocktail. She was her high school's salutatorian, the smartest person everyone knew. But she got pregnant at 18, right before graduation, and her dreams of college had to get shelved. She learned her childhood lessons too well. At 19, she was a single mom to J.D.'s sister Lindsay, with no degree and no husband. And into this mess, J.D. Vance was born. For a young boy, life became a masterclass in survival. He learned to navigate the revolving door of father figures his mother kept bringing home. There was Steve, with his midlife crisis earring. Chip, an alcoholic cop who thought the earring looked girly. Ken, this odd guy who proposed 3 days after meeting his mom. J.D. became a chameleon, constantly changing himself to please each new man, pretending to like whatever they liked, knowing deep down they wouldn't stick around anyway. This constant instability made him feel like he was tiptoeing through a minefield. One wrong step and everything explodes. Fights between his mom and whoever her current husband was would keep him up at night. Screaming, stomping, glass shattering. It was the soundtrack of his childhood. He'd drag himself to school exhausted and depressed, unable to focus, dreading the final bell because of what waited at home. He started getting severe stomachaches and headaches, what psychologists call somatic complaints, where deep emotional trauma manifests as physical pain. Home wasn't a refuge, it was something to survive. The chaos hit its peak when J.D. was 12. After an argument in the car, his mother started accelerating to 100 miles per hour, screaming that she was going to crash and kill them both. Terrified, JD scrambled into the back seat. She pulled over, and he bolted from the car, sprinting across a field until he found a house where a woman was floating in her pool. "Please help me," he screamed. "My mom is trying to kill me." He called Mamaw, but his mother tracked him down first. She broke down the woman's door and dragged him out while he clutched at the grass and guardrails, anything to stop her. Then the police showed up. They wrestled his mother into the back of a cruiser while she screamed and fought. JD sat alone in the back of the other police car, feeling a loneliness that cut deeper than anything before. He thought the hard part was over. In some ways, it was just beginning. This incident pulled them into the system. Social workers, family counseling, court dates. It also exposed the deeper problem lurking underneath everything: his mother's addiction to prescription painkillers. Papa's death a year later was the spark that ignited the final explosion. His mother's grief spiraled into complete breakdown. The semi-functioning addict became someone completely untethered from reality. One afternoon, she stood in her front yard in just a bath towel, screaming insults at her boyfriend, her daughter, and her friends before collapsing as a police officer tried to restrain her. She'd tried to cut her wrists. This was the bottom. JD was close to falling in with her. His grades had tanked. He was nearly failing out of high school. He was experimenting with drugs, drifting in a sea of family chaos with no anchor. He'd witnessed fighting, violence, addiction, and instability his entire life. But for the first time, he felt genuinely trapped with no way out. And that's when the rescue began. It didn't come from any government program or social worker. It came from the two people who'd caused so much of the original chaos, but had, in their later years, found an unexpected peace: Mamaw and Papa. Years earlier, Papa had simply quit drinking. No big announcement, no rehab program. He just stopped. He and Mamaw separated but stayed inseparable, spending almost every waking hour together. They became the stability JD desperately needed. Papa was the father figure who actually stuck around. When JD came home crying in first grade because a classmate knew multiplication and he didn't, Papa sat down and taught him not just multiplication, but division too. For years after, they practiced math together, a quiet ritual of love and learning that taught JD something profound. A lack of knowledge and a lack of intelligence aren't the same thing. One can be fixed with patience and hard work. But it was Mamaw who became his true savior, his hillbilly terminator. After his mother, deep in relapse, frantically demanded JD's clean urine to pass a nursing board drug test, Mamaw saw that a line had been crossed. She told JD to come live with her, permanently. "If your mom has a problem with it," she said, "she can talk to the barrel of my gun." For the next 3 years, JD lived in one house with one person. The chaos stopped. The screaming stopped. The parade of strangers stopped. Living with Mamaw wasn't exactly peaceful. She was a tough woman, with a sharp tongue and high standards. Her rules were straightforward: get good grades, get a job, and get off your ass and help me. If he forgot his homework, she called him shit for brains. If he didn't take out the garbage, he was a lazy piece of shit. But beneath all that profanity was an unwavering belief in him. She was the one who told him, "Never be like these losers who think the deck is stacked against them. You can do anything you want to." Her home gave him the peace to do homework, the stability to build real friendships, and the space to heal. He didn't realize it at the time, but his grades started improving almost immediately. The kid who nearly failed his freshman year was on his way somewhere else, but he still wasn't quite ready. When it came time for college, he looked at the financial aid forms for Ohio State and felt pure terror. The debt, the independence, the lack of structure, it was overwhelming. He knew he needed something to forge him into the man he wanted to become. That's when he joined the Marine Corps. Mamaw hated the idea. "You're a fucking idiot," she told him. "They'll chew you up and spit you out." But JD knew he had to go. Boot camp was a shock to the system. On day one, a drill instructor with a Tennessee drawl watched him grab a piece of cake in the chow hall, walked over, looked him up and down, and said, "You really need that cake, don't you, fat ass?" before smacking it out of his hands. J.D. had been conditioned his whole life to respond to insults with violence, but something shifted in that moment. He cleaned up the mess and went back to his seat. The Marine Corps, with its relentless challenges, started teaching him that he'd been underestimating himself his entire life. He'd spent years believing his choices didn't matter, a psychological state called learned helplessness. The Marines taught him the opposite, learned willfulness. They taught him discipline, responsibility, and how to actually function as an adult. How to balance a checkbook, run 3 miles in under 20 minutes, lead grown men. They took the chaos of his youth and replaced it with unbreakable structure. He served 4 years, including a deployment to Iraq, and came home a completely different person. The pudgy, insecure kid was gone. In his place stood a man who knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. He enrolled at Ohio State University and, in a whirlwind of focus and determination, graduated in under 2 years with highest honors. Next stop, Yale Law School. Arriving at Yale felt like landing on an alien planet. It was a world of breathtaking architecture, casual conversations with former prime ministers and governors, and social rituals he couldn't begin to decode. For the first time in his life, he felt like a complete outsider. Here, having a surgeon mother and engineer father was considered middle class. His classmates, brilliant and kind as they were, came from intact, wealthy families. They played by different rules, operated from a different playbook. This became painfully clear during a recruiting dinner at one of New Haven's fanciest restaurants. Confronted with 9 pieces of silverware, 2 types of white wine, and something called sparkling water, J.D. felt panic rising. He excused himself, called his girlfriend Usha, his Yale spirit guide, and whispered, "What do I do with all these forks?" But it wasn't really about forks. It was about social capital, those invisible networks and unspoken rules that successful people use to navigate the world. They don't just send out resumes, they network. They have mentors offering crucial advice at exactly the right moments. J.D. realized he'd been playing an entirely different game, and someone had just handed him the rulebook for the first time. Even with the rulebook, though, his old world still had its hooks in him. His relationship with Usha, the woman who'd become his wife, brought his childhood demons roaring to the surface. He was like a turtle, she told him. Whenever conflict appeared, he'd withdraw into his shell, unable to communicate, only able to scream or run away, the only 2 tools his childhood had given him. He was terrified he was becoming his mother. This fear forced him to confront his past in a new way. He learned about adverse childhood experiences, or ACE, traumatic events like divorce, living with an addict, or witnessing violence that can literally rewire a child's brain chemistry. He learned that the fight-or-flight response that had been essential for survival as a kid was now destructive in his adult life. He was hardwired for conflict, even when there was no actual conflict. He started seeing his mother differently, not as a villain, but as a victim of her own traumatic childhood, someone who'd lost the same statistical lottery he'd somehow managed to win. This understanding didn't magically fix everything. Upward mobility, he discovered, is never a clean break. A few years after graduating from law school, with a great job and a happy marriage, he found himself at a run-down roadside motel in Middletown at midnight. His mother was using again, homeless, after being kicked out by her 5th husband. J.D. was there to pay for a room to keep her off the streets. The American dream had pulled him up, but the world he'd left behind kept finding ways to pull him back. He strikes an uneasy truce with it. He helps when he can, but he also recognizes his own limitations, his need to protect the stable life he's built. J.D. Vance's story isn't your typical rags-to-riches tale. It's a story about what it means to be a cultural emigrant, to move from one world to another, and never quite feel like you fully belong in either. He looks back and sees how many things had to go right, how many people had to put their thumb on the scale just to give him a fighting chance. Mama and Papa, his sister Lindsay, his Aunt Wee and Uncle Dan, teachers, mentors in the Marines, professors at Yale. And he ends with a haunting question. He thinks about other kids like him, kids like Brian, a young boy from Appalachian, Kentucky, hungry and scared, whose mother just died. What happens to them? They don't have a mama or papa. What happens when the thumbs are pushing down on the scale instead of up? J.D. Vance escaped. He's, as he says, one lucky son of a bitch. But his elegy, his lament, is for all the ones who didn't. What makes Hillbilly Elegy so powerful is its refusal to hand us simple answers. It would be easy to blame everything on economic decline, on factories closing and jobs vanishing. And sure, that's part of the story. But J.D. Vance takes us deeper. He shows us the problems are also about family, faith, and culture. It's a crisis of the spirit. One of the most profound lessons from his journey is this concept of learned helplessness. Just think about that for a second. It's the belief that your choices fundamentally don't matter, that no matter how hard you try, the outcome will be the same. When you grow up in constant chaos, where promises always get broken and stability is some mythical concept, it's incredibly easy to start believing you have zero control. That belief is poison. It drains your ambition and convinces you not to even bother trying. Vance's story is fundamentally about unlearning that helplessness. It was Papa, patiently teaching him math, showing him that effort actually leads to understanding. It was Mamaw, demanding good grades and a job, insisting he wasn't some loser who thinks the deck is stacked against him. And it was the Marine Corps, systematically breaking him down and rebuilding him with the conviction that he could overcome any obstacle. The message became crystal clear. Your choices do matter. In fact, they're the only thing that actually matters. This brings us to the book's second crucial insight, the power of stability. We often think about opportunity in terms of money or resources, but Vance's life shows us the most valuable resource might just be a safe, predictable environment. His life didn't turn around when he got a scholarship or entered some special program. It turned around the day he moved in with his grandmother and, for 3 straight years, lived in the same house with the same person. That peace, that absence of chaos, that was the fertile ground where everything else could finally grow. It's a powerful reminder that before we can even think about climbing any ladder of success, we need solid ground beneath our feet. So what can we actually take from this? How can you apply these lessons to your own life, even if your world looks nothing like his? First, find your mama. And no, I don't mean you need a foul-mouthed, gun-toting grandmother, though that might be entertaining. I mean you need to find people in your life who believe in you with unwavering, almost irrational faith. People who hold you to higher standards and refuse to let you make excuses. It could be a teacher, a coach, a mentor, or a friend. Find that person, and when they tell you that you can do anything, choose to believe them. Second, recognize your own cultural inheritance. We all come from somewhere. We all have scripts we learned from our families and communities about how the world works, about what's possible for people like us. J.D.'s journey to self-awareness began when he started understanding the demons he'd inherited, his hair-trigger temper, his instinct to run from conflict. Take an honest look at your own programming. What beliefs or habits have you inherited that might be holding you back? Understanding your past isn't about making excuses. It's about taking away its power over your future. Finally, remember the power of putting a thumb on the scale. J.D. Vance knows he didn't make it alone. His life is proof of the crucial impact of small interventions from caring adults. You have that power too. You might not be able to solve the world's problems, But you can be a force for stability and encouragement in someone's life. You can be the friend who listens, the classmate who helps, the person who refuses to let someone they care about surrender to helplessness. That was a summary of Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. We've journeyed through the heart of his story today, but here's the truth. A summary can only show you the map. The real magic happens when you walk the territory yourself, when a particular story or a simple phrase from Mamaw hits you in a way you didn't expect. This podcast is designed to help you figure out if a book deserves your time. If anything we've talked about today has resonated with you, if you felt any connection to this story of struggle and resilience, then I'd encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts. It's an experience that can genuinely shift how you see your country, your family, and maybe even yourself. The link to the book is right there in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me know these deep dives are worthwhile, and it makes sure you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep growing together.